Hello, today I'm here to bring you a review of Sufficient Grace by Amy Espeseth. This was one of the picks for the February Moth box and it is by Scribe Books. Now I had a real journey with this book and I'm really glad that I got the Moth box because I would never have discovered this book otherwise and I probably never would have picked a book like this up otherwise, but I'm so glad I did. So firstly I'll tell you what this is about. This is about a girl called Ruth who lives in Wisconsin and she lives in quite a religious community and it's basically about her day-to-day life. It's about her relationship with her adopted cousin Naomi, and it looks at sort of the way that they live and the society that they live in. It looks at the nature a lot that's all around them, and they sort of are quite heavily into hunting and things like that, and it looks at that. And it also looks at the fact that Naomi is from an Indian family, and it looks at how the community treats the sort of quite large Indian population that there is and the way that they sort of, especially the family, disregard the fact because she has become one of them, she's in their fold, so they don't like to think about where she came from. For me, I found that for the first sort of 200 pages of this book, it's 320 pages long, and for the first 200 pages I was enjoying it. I could see that the writing was beautiful, but I was kind of feeling as though the attention was in a strange place and I didn't understand, like, there's a lot of description about the weather and the nature around them and the hunting and things like that, and I kind of felt like the focus should have been more on the family than on the nature, and that sometimes something would be happening and our narrator would sort of distract us with beautiful language. What I realised in the last sort of 120 pages is that all of it is so cleverly done and everything in here is done for a good reason. This is basically a metaphor about religion and the damaging effect of being overly religious, and it's not against religion. There's certainly stuff in here that sort of looks at the fact that religion can be a real comfort. It can make you feel as though there's something there and it can sort of help you through the hard times, but it also looks at the damaging effects of religion. So the fact that Ruth, for example, something bad happens, and there are some terrible things that happen in this book, and it is constantly got this underlying violence in it, and the language is so beautiful but it's describing really violent things, and I realised that the reason for that is because in religion it is sort of smoke screens and mirrors, and it's like, oh, something terrible is happening over here because of our beliefs and because of our discriminations, but look at this beautiful thing here, and it's sort of, you're constantly, you know that the bad things are happening, but because they're described to you in such a gentle and soothing way, you kind of don't realise the extent of the badness. And I think that kind of was Amy Espeseth's way of saying that that is what religion does. It does some terrible things and it causes people to do terrible things, but it sort of says, but it's okay because we've got this beautiful belief over here, and it sort of constantly distracts your attention from the bad things that are happening. It also looks at the guilt that Christianity can put on somebody. So Ruth is only 13 years old and she's sort of struggling with her own identity and her own Christianity at the moment, and it sort of looks at the level of guilt that is caused to her when she feels like she has sinned or done something bad, and it looks at the fact that religion constantly does put this pressure on you to be the best person that you are, and if you feel like you failed in any way, even if it's just an imagined failure, it puts this huge weight on your shoulders and you feel terrible. It also looks at the fact that yes, Ruth is questioning her religion at the moment and she's not quite sure whether everything is as it should be. But again, it goes back to the comfort of religion, and every time, there are two times especially in here when something terrible is happening and she says that yes, God is probably answering their prayers and she's sure that he is doing something, but she can't hear him at the moment, and it's sort of a perfect metaphor for the fact that she's struggling in her faith and she's struggling to understand that God is there even under all this terrible stuff. And it also looks at, there's situations in this book where there's a lot of denial in this book, as there is a lot of denial in religion, and again goes back to the smoke screens and the fact that terrible things happen but it's all distraction and blah blah blah, everything's fine, and it looks at that distraction and that blind faith and the willful ignorance of a lot of people who follow religion to that extent. But it also looks at the fact, and there's something in here that happens that, yes, for a lot of the book, the adults in the book don't realise what's happening. It's something that happens to Naomi But there comes to a point where there's no way that they can deny it, and yet they're still trying to ignore what's happened or say that maybe it didn't happen the way they're thinking it did, when really they know that exactly what happened and they know what it means. I think for me that was a wonderful, again, metaphor of religion and how much courage and strength it actually takes to follow something blindly, even in the face of proof that is undeniably to the contrary. So for me, it was a really cleverly written book. It's so intricate in its themes, and again, as I say, it doesn't diss religion, it doesn't completely rip religion apart, but it looks at it in a very practical and metaphorical way. And yet underneath all of this, there is that constant feeling of comfort and that constant feeling that yes, religion isn't good, but you can see why people believe in it and why it can lead to a better life if it's done right. It's not a fast-paced book, and the plot isn't necessarily the fastest of all. I think it's definitely a book in which the themes override the plot. On the back, it describes that it's something to do with Ruth and Naomi, and the fact that something happens to Naomi and Ruth doesn't know what to do about it. And yes, that is in there, but that again doesn't really come to the forefront until the last sort of 200, 150 pages. So for the most of it, it is just about the lifestyle and about this slowly building atmosphere. It's so good. I would definitely recommend people read this if it sounds like your cup of tea. It kind of reminded me of Ruby by Cynthia Bond, not in terms of the racial aspect, but definitely in terms of the society and the way that people viewed things and the narrow blinkered view of a lot of the people in here. And ultimately, even though it is a really depressing book and really terrible things happen, it is a beautiful book, and it ultimately comes back to the theme of love and the fact that love is enough to get you through anything terrible that happens. It is so good, and as I say, I'm so glad that I got the Moth Box, else I would never have discovered this, and that's the joy of something like the Moth Box. I will link the Moth Box website and Twitter account down below, and definitely check that out if you haven't already. And I'll see you next time. Bye!